Hi, Mr. Tariq. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Thank you, Ms. Jocelyn.
I just
Thank
want
you
to
for
thank
giving
you.
me this opportunity.
I want to thank you for giving me your time to take this interview. And I apologize from now, but I'm not feeling well. So I might have to repeat the question more than once for you to hear.
No worries, no worries. Am I clear enough for you?
Yes, perfect. Thank you. Now, I know that you were teaching a student with a hearing impairment around 2 years back. And
Yes,
this student, he lost his hearing when he was older. He wasn't born with a hearing impairment. So
that's true.
I just want you to tell me what challenges have you faced teaching the student?
Challenges I faced teaching the student. Well, it's pretty basic. The challenge is pretty basic. It was communication, right? Fortunately, this child was a brilliant person, he has a brilliant mind, and he's pretty hardworking. So I had to actively make sure that the student had visual access to my face so he could lip read. Okay. So moving around the class can cost Ahmed precious information. Otherwise, I'd have to repeat and reshape my questions. So unobstructed vision to my face and to the whole frontal area of the class was key, right?
Okay,
Not
so
Yeah.
yeah, so since he had to see, let's say, the front part of you, and if you moved
Mhm.
around the class, that wasn't able for him to read your lips. How
Yes.
was an accommodation done during COVID? Because if I'm not mistaken, you were teaching him during COVID, correct? It was online. So, what
Yes.
accommodation or what challenges and accommodations did you do during COVID? Because remember, we had to have our masks on. So, if you could just explain the process and what exactly happened with
Um, to be honest, it was a very delicate approach. There were a bunch of strategies. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about strategies that I'd use in the class and I'd use with him in a video call, right? Um, well, I made sure that the lectures were all recorded for him to go back and revise. I made sure that the video and live call were captioned, live captioned. You know, captions came popped up every time anyone spoke. Um, I also made sure I tried my best to minimize background noises. So sometimes I would teach the entire class, including Ahmed, and then I'd break him out into separate private video calls between him and I would tend to his questions. I'd reteach. I'd make sure that he understood something or not. So yeah, pretty much these things. I used a lot of colors. I tended to the lighting. I made sure that Ahmed reduced the brightness of his screen all the time. And even when we were in class, there was a month or two when I taught him in class. I'd make sure that the brightness of the LED was a bit dimmed because his entire focus is his eyes. The
you?
sense that he's using most of the time to acquire information are his eyes, and so I didn't want to compromise those during the lesson. Um, Note taking was very important. Now, it's pretty difficult for a student with hearing impairment to pay attention to your lips and whatever's being written on the board by the teacher, okay, and take notes at the same time. So what I do is I'd make sure Ahmed had access to the highest achieving students' notes. I'd tell Ahmed, okay, hey, you know what? I want you to focus in class now. Don't worry about taking notes. You will take the notes of someone else's, um, a very reliable note, actually, a notebook, and he'd just copy those back onto his own notebook. I made sure well, not all, to be quite frank, not all the time was I able to do this, but I always had handouts. I always had additional support materials for Ahmed. Um, so it really did add more work on my part, but I'd made sure that Ahmed had everything he needed, okay, to make it on his own. Um, so these were called supplement or additional support material.
Okay.
Okay.
You mentioned that you taught him in class for around 2 months. Now, during
Yes.
COVID, we had masks on,
Yes.
and he depends on his lip reading. So,
Yes.
what happened in that
Actually,
between? KH did.
yes, these 2 months were before COVID.
Okay.
Yeah. So I taught him when COVID started, and then the next year when COVID was the lockdown was actually
Okay.
um
So you didn't have
yeah.
any issues regarding the mask and
Thank God I didn't, because that would have made it very challenging for me as a teacher to make sure Ahmed got what he needed.
okay.
Otherwise, otherwise I would have had to sit with him one on one or open a video call with him to make sure that he got. So it would have been definitely challenging on my part.
Yes. Okay.
I made sure written materials are always there. So even his activities and exercises, okay, I made sure that the videos were all visual aids and videos were all captioned and consistent. Another thing that I did, Ms. Jocelyn, was make sure that Ahmed was sat in a group, uh, heterogeneous group. Okay, so I made sure that there was one student that was more um, performed better than Ahmed and someone that didn't perform as good as Ahmed. This way, Ahmed would have opportunities to help and be helped at the same time, because you're teaching a class of 30 students, you need to cater to these students' needs as well. So you won't be in front of Ahmed giving him the access he needs visually to read your lips when tending to other students in other groups. So I made sure that other students co-taught with me, making sure Ahmad had everything that he needed, right? I used a lot of miming and gesturing. They worked.
Did you use
Uh,
illustrations?
I did use illustrations and I used a lot of pictures to clarify vocabulary words, for example. Right.
Um,
Basically, everything Ahmed depended heavily on reading and writing to produce. So the only ways I got authentic performances from Ahmed was through reading to make sure that his receptive uh, skills in language worked. It was the only indicator for me to understand that Ahmed actually understood the lesson. And to cater to his productive skills, writing. I always made sure Ahmed produced through writing, not speaking. I did give him opportunities. Mind you, I even tried uh, I actually tried to, for listening script, for example, I read it out loud, slowly, making sure that Ahmed saw the shape of my lips as I was articulating the words. I played around with a few techniques. They didn't really play out to his advantage most of the time, but I did try that, and to some extent, it helped out. And
have you
based on these experiments, I ruled out a few strategies that didn't work for
didn't
Ahmed.
what didn't work? For example,
Everything
if you
that
remember from the top of your head.
what didn't work
For example, if you remember.
for Ahmed. To be honest, okay, so basically listening never worked for Ahmed, despite my despite him having a hearing aid, he could hear a little bit of sounds. It didn't work. I did not depend on that whatsoever. I did give him opportunities to present. His PowerPoints were so good. They exceeded expectations, but his delivery and um, voice projection and impact needed some work.
Do you feel like
His
he had
writing,
confidence?
he did have confidence because this boy's parents really did work on Ahmed's confidence, to be honest. And I always backed him up on a personal level as well. I, I failed to mention something. So remember your first question, what challenges I faced, and I mentioned something about my communication, bringing across the information I wanted him to learn. But it was also challenging for me to know what is going on in Ahmed's head and life most of the time. So it's a two-way street for us, teacher and student interaction. So it was challenging for me to really know if he understood or not, and if he was being bullied. Okay,
He was
so I
being
had to check.
bullied, correct?
Sorry.
He was being bullied.
Um, well, not heavily because we kept a very close eye on him.
Yeah. So he had friends who would communicate with others. He'd enjoy his break time, free time, PE. He'd enjoy them. So he had friends.
Yes. And I'm not sure if this would help your research. Even when they spoke in Arabic during the break time, Ahmed would only really fully understand those who spoke Egyptian Arabic.
Really?
Yeah, so if I spoke in my Lebanese accent, or if his classmates spoke in the Khaliji accent, he wouldn't quite he wouldn't quite get you. You know what I mean? Unless they are words that are in the standard modern standard Arabic or classical Arabic.
Interesting. I wasn't aware of that.
So yes, so maybe that would be a side note for your research as well.
Okay. Well, you actually answered several of my questions. What advice would you give to other teachers who teach students with hearing impairments?
Advice. To be honest, being patient
Yes, is the key.
is an understatement. It's an understatement here because you have no choice but to be patient with Ahmed. It cannot be a day. Trust me, we're all human. And there were days when I couldn't handle it anymore because we work in an industry that's super stressful. Okay. Teachers really need to be patient with Ahmed, for example. I keep on saying his name because he was the only case I ever had.
Yeah,
And I say his name because I established a relationship with Ahmed. Him and I were still good. We still talk, right? I still overlook his research whenever he'd pass by and be like, "Oh, Mister, can you take a look at this?" So
yeah.
I have a personal thing going on with him.
That's nice.
Um,
Something like that.
building a very close bond with Ahmed is another important thing.
What is it? I
So we
lost you.
building a relationship, a personal relationship with
Uh,
Ahmed, with people like Ahmed, all right, is also important because these kids need moral support. I'm going to touch on our inclusive team in our school now. Okay. To be quite frank, I don't think that they are equipped to deal with with people like Ahmed's situation. All right. And in Ahmed's case, because he's the only one in our school with this case, they took for granted that he was a brilliant, intelligent, smart person and a hard worker, and that his parents supported him at home, which
he
isn't the
got
case for
support from his parents.
yes, which isn't the case for most of our regular students. Okay. I believe that our school, okay, the inclusive team or department took advantage of that because what the inclusive teams test in are the mentally challenged special needs students. And our teachers are working on that niche. But teachers don't know how to deal with students with physical impairments, right? And sense impaired students.
He wasn't pulled
They
out nor pulled in any class.
never was he pulled out. He never needed that because Ahmad
Was
pretty much
intelligent.
understood everything. Yes, and he was talented. Okay, he always for the 2 years, he in the 2 years that I taught him, he maintained a high average of 80.
Wow.
Okay, but just because he carried it well doesn't mean that it's not heavy, Miss Jocelyn.
Or just because
And
he's doing well
and
doesn't mean that he should be neglected by the inclusive team.
yes, and taken granted of by teachers, parents, or friends, or anyone. Just because someone holds something very well doesn't mean it's not heavy. And that's where compassion and the establishment of that rapport with the kid is important. They need to know that you've got their backs. Because guess what? You think that you'd give up because, oh, it's too much to think about. Guess what? It's 10 times harder for
For him.
someone like,
Yes, of course.
and he is more on the verge of giving up than you,
Of course.
right? As the teacher. So you need to keep that morale up.
But as long as he got support from his parents and teachers
Parents,
like you, I'm
teachers,
sure that he was
and
on the right track.
yes, and students, it's important. Another advice I'd give teachers is to make sure that these kids have are put in heterogeneous group seatings. Why? Because they would be getting help from someone who is better than them, and they would practice helping others, so they would feel less help. Okay, when you help someone else, you feel a bit empowered.
Yeah,
So it's psychology here as well. So these are three pieces of
right.
advice, and if you think about these three pieces of advice, they're not teaching strategies, they're more psychologically inclined. Do you
Yeah,
understand? And socially inclined. So if you put them in the right seating plan, it's social and psychological and academic at the same time, right? If you have patience, it's more um, psychological for the kid, okay?
I'm
And
sorry, but
keeping that rapport.
we have 9 minutes remaining. I'm sorry.
No problem. No
I
problem.
just got the notification that
It, it's okay. Yes, I understand.
I'm very sorry. Okay.
No problem.
No, I want you to continue. Please continue. I just wanted to inform you that we have 9 minutes left. Please continue.
Oh, yes. Okay. So basically, yes, the spectrums in which my pieces of advice go under are socio-psychological more than they are academic. Obviously, the teachers still need to, in the name of inclusion, still need to apply strategies, the same strategies that you would use with regular students, but these main three need to be in play for people like Ahmed to succeed. It's very important. Oh, and creating, maybe another piece of advice would be creating culture in class to accommodate Ahmed. Because sometimes the class needs to be quiet. Ironically, the class needs to be quiet for Ahmed to do some sort of performances.
And
He
not to
doesn't
be
really,
distracted. And not to be distracted.
yes, yes.
Because
And you
any
don't want to distract yourself as a teacher as well. So there needs to be a culture from the get-go, in the expectations, from the beginning of the year. You need to speak to the kids and you need to add them into the expectations shared. And they need to be enforced.
did you receive any training or PT about hearing impairment, or did you just learn this as you went, you just went with the flow, or did you take some kind of training?
Unfortunately, no training on Ahmed's case was ever provided. I had to actually read
Go
stuff
with the flow.
online in the minimal time and experiment. I mentioned something in my talk earlier
It's
about
true.
experimenting, and I got to know what worked for Ahmad and what didn't.
Yeah.
And we can okay, my experience can go down as a case study, but my experiences aren't necessarily cookie cutter. You know what I mean? So my experiences cannot necessarily work on other people like Ahmed with hearing impairments. every student is different.
Of course. And don't forget that Ahmed, he knows how to talk because he lost his hearing
Yes.
when he was older. Some children are born with hearing impairment, so their cases are going to be different.
Absolutely. I even learned some simple sign languages like mom, dad, thank you, let's you and me together go. Gesturing really works. Everything visual, everything,
You
all
learned all of
movement.
this because of Ahmed?
Yes. And it was pretty fun. Honestly, I don't remember any of my sign language words, but I mean, at the time when I was using them, they were quite
And
frequent.
Ahmed knows how to sign, correct?
I'm not sure. Back in the day when I taught him 2 years ago, he wasn't pretty good at it, but I'm not sure now how he's doing.
Okay, okay. Um, have you ever worked with an interpreter? Um, can you hear me? Or a specialist to support the
I can
student?
hear you. I can hear you. Um, an interpreter. Our school has a budgeting issue, so no interpreter was provided for Ahmad. It was basically
Yeah.
Ahmad on his own
And the parents, as you
and
mentioned.
the parents. Now, to be honest, with when it came to language, thankfully there wasn't a lot of communication between the parents and I because I don't think they felt the need to communicate or contact me because
It
Ahmad
was
was
a
doing
toxic.
pretty well.
Last question.
Go
Uh,
ahead.
let me just make sure we ticked all of the boxes.
Yeah.
To be honest, you answered most of the questions without even me actually asking them. So, okay, خلاص,
I'm
we're
glad.
done. We're done. Would you like to add anything? I really appreciate this. Would you like to add
Um,
anything because we still have 4 minutes remaining because we covered all the questions?
Yeah, that's pretty much everything. So as a summary, we just need to be patient, compassionate, establish a really warm, comforting, understanding relationship with these kids. Um, they need to be consistently reassured that they're not alone. And yes, it is challenging on the teacher because the teacher needs to take on a lot more load, especially if the teacher isn't trained, especially if the teacher is a very responsible teacher. Yes, it's not easy, but it is necessary because we always work with the students that we have. Despite all the odds, we need to deliver as much as we can. And for the sake of lifelong learning, us teachers we need to go ahead with case studies. We need to keep being enlightened and educated and not blame ourselves too much, okay? And trust the process. So basically, patience, rapport, compassion, morale, seating plans, establishing a culture with making sure that the whole classroom works for Ahmed. Basically, that's what helped Ahmed a lot.
And it seems like you're a very passionate teacher.
I try my best. I really, really do.
Learning
Okay,
sign
I'm not.
language for a student is it's something very special, actually.
All we can do is try our best, Miss Jocelyn. Honestly, with the world of education turning into a business industry, it's really difficult for passionate teachers to thrive. But we really need to keep that because education is basically what goes on in the classroom and what the teacher has to offer, and the responsibility of the teacher and the mindset of the teacher.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
It was my pleasure.
I really appreciate it. And again,
Thank you
thank
for
you
the
for your
opportunity.
time. I'm going to be stopping the recording.